Hello, everybody. As our panelists get settled, we just want to thank you for being here. We're looking forward to this discussion, and we have lots of good content for you. And definitely, please, interactive discussion. If you have questions, we're happy to work them into the presentation in general. So Socratic is always the best way to go. Okay. So what I'd like to do to kick us off is really just kind of introduce each of our panelists and then allow them a moment or two to introduce themselves and their organization, and then we'll really get into the discussion. So I'll start on the end with Senator Chris Lee, who is a representative in the Senate in Hawaii in the 25th District and chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee. And next to Chris is Jaime Duyck, who is the Chief Revenue Officer for ChargerHelp, which we're very excited here. They have a home in Los Angeles, just down the street. And then Michael Samuelon is the Director of Vehicle Electrification and City Projects at the City of Los Angeles. So we welcome Michael. And right to my right is Heidi Sickler, who is the Director of Policy at BP Pulse Fleet. So maybe if I could, Senator Lee, if you just take a few moments and introduce yourself and some of your work, and we'll go down the line.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's so good to be here. It's so great to be in a place where I think there's actually collaboration amongst all these different stakeholders coming from different backgrounds. In Hawaii, we tend to be very singularly focused in our little bubble. But what we are doing there, we've put in place just in the broad strokes goals of being carbon negative statewide by 2045. We've got transportation goals. All our counties have targets to transition their public transportation fleets. Our state fleet is going to transition completely and be electrified by 2030. And we are making progress complementing those goals with actual charging infrastructure implementation and a whole bunch of other policies to connect utilities with transit services, with government, with private sector investors and financiers, and the whole spectrum. So for us, I think this is a road that we are definitely committed to and starting to make some real progress, and look forward to partnering with everybody else who's doing the same thing.
Excellent. Jaime, please.
Is this on? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name's Jaime with ChargerHelp, which is a technology and workforce development company dedicated to charging station uptime and reliability. And we do that through, of course, workforce development and enablement, garnering certifications both in safety, hardware, software, and also leveraging our own in-house platform called Empower, which really empowers folks to garner in-field data inputs so that we can learn from charging stations over time and be able to resolve the issues, whether they're hardware, software, communications, et cetera, quickly and efficiently. And I think the role that ChargerHelp plays in fleet electrification and electrification writ large is that it will take a very massive workforce of skilled and trained EVSE technicians who can solve for vast and various circumstances that relate to station downtime. So very happy to contribute on this panel of very nice and smart people.
Thanks, Heidi. Michael, please.
Good morning, everyone. Michael Samuelon in Mayor Garcetti's Sustainability Office. I have had the pleasure of being our EV guy since 2015, which means I've seen a lot of growth and changes in the industry, and it's been exciting to lead our transportation decarbonization efforts. That has been a lot of internal work, all of our lead by example efforts with our fleets, which include 20,000 vehicles across all 6 of them, which include a seaport, an airport, a utility, and then of course all of our sort of regular business as usual city stuff, building streets and sewers and things like that. So a lot of specialized equipment that we've been looking at and trying to electrify. And then, of course, working on all of our external facing work, our building codes, deploying chargers for the public at our public lots, and trying to help facilitate streamlining where we can, working with partners like ChargerHelp and of course BP Pulse on various efforts, and just trying to be at the tip of the spear for municipalities and cities, showing that we can do it and it's possible.
Heidi.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here. Thank you, Senator Lee, for being here. Jamie and Michael, it's great to be a part of this panel. Let's see.
Contributed to a lot of the policy work in the IIJA and IRA. Needless to say, I think everybody here recognizes that we have an immediate challenge in front of us. I think there's widespread acceptance that GHG emissions from the transportation sector need addressed, and they're contributing in a negative fashion to climate change. But what's interesting about this study is Princeton really lays out 5 pathways that we can get to net zero. And it really is a summary of the different combinations of primary energy mix that will be required for us to do that. Interesting stat, so, for us to get to net zero, the primary energy mix made up currently of fossil fuels has to decline across all 5 scenarios. And the statistic that they cite is between 62 and 100% from 2020 to 2050. That's a pretty impactful statistic. And it's also equally impactful that all of the scenarios require fossil fuels to drastically be reduced. So none of that's news to you in the audience today, but when you look at the 3 key elements of the study, the role and extent of electrification is the first of the 3 priorities. And then when you continue to move through it, physical infrastructure, capital mobilization, land use, energy workforce, and air pollution and public health are all of the 5 kind of core components. So the major risk the study identifies is failure to deploy infrastructure immediately and at unprecedented rates. So, alas, why we're here today is to talk about fleet electrification and its role in this transition. So I want to start maybe and ask Jaime a question. So when you think about commercial fleets and you think about ride-sharing fleets, obviously now when you think about commercial vehicles, they have the luxury in a lot of ways to go back to a depot at the end of the evening, charge, and then go back out onto the road. Obviously with mass scale adoption of fleet electrification, that's going to change. So when you think about that, Jaime, and you think about the issues and the challenges that it raises, would you kind of share your thoughts on that, what we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, not to use just a blanket statement, easy out, answer, but the reality is that whether charging is, housed at a depot in a behind the gate environment or public infrastructure, it needs to work and it needs to be reliable, because folks that are moving people, goods, and services across the country rely on multi deployments of charging stations. And so, there needs to be equitable access and abilities for folks to always be able to get a charge, which doubles in consumer and commercial confidence and adoption of just leveraging charging stations, whether it's in the wild or at depots. So I think important for us to stay, focused on fleet electrification and maybe just holding a lens to that. It could be both depot or public that is necessary for fleets to operate writ large.
Thanks, Jaime. Michael and Heidi, anything you'd like to contribute to kind of the context setting there?
I would offer that, and I don't see it in a commercial sense, but I see it in an operational sense with our fleets. We know that there are going to be a lot of learning lessons right now. This is new technology. It doesn't work perfectly out the gate right now, and a lot of times, at least from the vantage point of where I am, of the sort of the advocate and the pusher on the government side, or other advocates who sort of want to see all of this happen really quickly, we may tend to sort of put a rose-colored lens on everything, and I think we have to acknowledge when things aren't working, and that's what allows companies like ChargerHelp to come around, or others who see, hey, there's a problem, this stuff doesn't always work, we need to make sure we address that, we need to make sure uptime is happening. We see that with a lot of the equipment we're testing. It's great, it works pretty well, but it's not always up, and these are the kind of things that I think we want to make sure to not sort of paper over and acknowledge, so that the market can come and provide some sort of fixes for that stuff.
So speaking of the market, I'll offer the energy management perspective, which I'm sure a lot of you here in the audience today are very familiar with. So just a couple of comments. In the United States, currently there are over 3,000 utilities. 3,000. And each one of those utilities has its own tariff structure, unique tariff structure, time of use rate, and demand charges. And it's a highly, highly complex operating environment for the average fleet operator. Just to give you an example, here in Southern California, we have a situation where right across from each other, you have Southern California Edison and LADWP, each with their own unique EV tariffs. So just think about that for a moment. Right across from each other, the most economical way to charge an EV drastically different by the hundreds of percentages in terms of price differential, not a couple of single digit. So what we're trying to do here at Amply and now BP Pulse Fleet is to remove that risk, variability in electricity pricing by automating it through software. And that really sits at the center of our charging as a service offering, which also folds in not just our Omega energy management platform, but also the acquisition, the installation, and the deployment of charging infrastructure, and also service level agreements. As Jaime mentioned, that is a huge, can be a huge liability for most fleet operators. So we want to remove that from the balance sheets and take care of it, fold it into this per kilowatt hour offerings, our charging as a service deployment. So again, we've identified the major risks and barriers to fleet electrification, and we've offered a solution, and we've proven out that it works. So we invite you to work with us if you're not already.
So one question, and I'd like to maybe start with Michael and ask Senator Lee for his perspective as well. But obviously, there are the technical priorities, there are the policy priorities that we're all thinking about, but there's also the realities on the ground. What's happening? And I think it's particularly interesting to maybe ask Michael, from your perspective in the city of Los Angeles, what are the realities on the ground that we need to be thinking about when we look at large-scale fleet electrification and passenger car electrification in general?
Well, I'm going to start from talking about the city's perspective as a utility, actually, and then thinking about all this federal money that, federal and state money that here in California that we know is coming in for this work. We see that there are a lot of formula funds coming in and things of this nature that require, going into a certain pathway, and that may be really a good starting point for some. But for example, here in California, all of our utilities have incentive and rebate programs. So if I'm the federal government, just using the NEVI program as an example, they said, all right, all of this goes to the state DOTs, each one of you figure it out, you're going to do your formula funds in whatever ways looks best for you. Well, that might be really good in states that haven't developed programs, but right here, just as an example, and maybe not for NEVI specifically, but for the discretionary portion of NEVI or for some of the other IRA stuff coming in, we can take direct funds, put the money into Edison, put the money into DWP, put the money into PG&E directly, let them put it into their programs that they have that people seem to want. I have not used a lot of those programs aside from the ones at DWP, so I can't speak to how well they work, but I know that at DWP, we have more demand than supply on the money side. So if we had more money, we could get it out the door, which directly would lead to more chargers and more charging and more vehicles and things like that. So I guess the point in all of that is different needs should be sort of recognized and acknowledged, and that there isn't a uniform approach that's going to work across the whole country as we all sort of get to a sort of similar point over the next decade, let's say. But so acknowledging our differences up front.
Now you also have a V2G export rate.
Senator Lee, we'd love to also hear you, as the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee in Hawaii, how are you thinking about these issues?
I think building on what Michael was talking about, we have this, and this is true in all 50 states and certainly other places around the world, you have these existing governmental bodies and infrastructures and silos through which funding and transition and policy have been executed for a century or more in this space. And now all of a sudden we're trying to cram down all this change, all these new resources, all these new requirements, all these new everything, to say nothing of what the public is expecting and demanding all at the same time. And I think there's a lot of rejiggering within government itself in different ways to make that process more efficient, more realistic, and address a lot of the absolute unknowns that are creeping up, like, for example, charger maintenance and things like that, which you don't think about in year one, but by the time you get to year 3 or 5 or 7, it's a real issue. And so that's a big challenge, number one. And backing out just a step from there, I think we're also facing, and we all, I think, if anybody's showing up here today, you're probably here for a reason, and you're well versed in this space we're talking about. But for the average person, for like constituents that reach out to us on a regular basis, who want to get into this or figure out what it is that their role is as a regular consumer, as a taxpayer in this space, they don't know what the heck they're talking about most of the time. They don't know what the possibility is. They don't know where the ceiling is. They don't know how it benefits them in a tangible way. I think, I drive a Model 3, and I have for a few years. And the biggest question I get when I pull up to a community meeting is, whoa, how do you afford that? Not realizing that, the Tacoma this guy drove up in is like more expensive than my car. And when you get into the question of like, how do we as a society, as government, educate people so that when we talk about things like we're going to convert our bus fleets, for example, people aren't going to say, well, this is just way too expensive. We just cannot do this. You're going to spend all this money that you could be spending filling the pothole in front of my house or whatever else. That kind of thing is real because it has an effect, a sort of a trickle-down effect, where we here as policymakers, as elected officials who have elections every couple of years, hear from the public's going to demand what the public wants or believes it wants. And if it's wrong information, or if it's out of date, or if there's no vision for what could be or understanding of what those roadblocks and hurdles are, you're going to get policymakers putting in place the wrong policies, the wrong incentives, not doing anything. And actually, there's a great example of this. In 2015, one of the bills I pushed through at the time made Hawaii the first state to commit to 100% clean energy in the electricity sector, which got a whole bunch of attention. But the exact same time, we also put into law a separate bill which said we're going to be eliminating fossil fuels from all ground transportation, period, hard stop. And in those years since, it's 2015, that's 7 years ago now, there are DOT and other agencies who were, I think, blindsided by something like this, said, all right, we'll start looking at it, and I don't know, it'll go on a shelf somewhere, and we'll figure out what to do eventually. The next guy's coming in, we'll let it be his problem. But there's also this disconnect there, where we have to figure out how to translate what that public interest is, and in some cases educate, and then translate that into effective policy, not just goals, and then be able to create a safe space where all the different players in the ecosystem, everybody who's sitting here, the utilities and third-party folks providing different grid services and transportation services and manufacturers and on, all have an ease of operation, and I think perhaps a gold standard by which to operate. And I think that's something where we have to think big, and we haven't quite done that yet in most places. I talked, I think, earlier about sort of this idea of a moonshot. When we went to the moon, it wasn't like, okay, we're going to figure out technically what we're going to do here, and then we're going to go over here, and NASA's going to do this, and they're going to contract out for that. It was, no, we're going here, this is where we're going, everybody's aligned, and then we figure it out and break it down from there. And that's exactly, from government's role now, I think what we're trying to figure out and grapple with. Because obviously, everybody's running into their own issues and their own sets of challenges, and they're not going to get resolved in an effective way if we're not all aligned to begin with.
Yeah, kind of building on that and the ChargerHelp lens, it's like it is not enough to just invest in hardware, software, and infrastructure. It is so important for us to be investing right now in people power, which is then paired with all of these cool technology tools, right? And collecting data and using that data to do more. It is extremely important that as we build more and more infrastructure all over the United States, that these are resulting in real, equitable, paying jobs where folks are being, championed into this new transportation, right? I mean, at ChargerHelp, a lot of our EVSE technicians are ex-oil and gas or communications, and it is a great opportunity for folks to play a role and garner more knowledge about e-mobility and that there's so many more opportunities to stem out of that. So think about jobs and think about that speaking of like knowledge, right? Like in order to become experienced, you need to, have a lot of time and effort and touching and learning about something. But to have expertise is really equity and knowledge and access to information. So it's important for us, Michael, you mentioned it, like we're early on, and I don't, no one has perfect answers to this. So it is even more important to apply operations and maintenance, which is not just, call us when something breaks. It's that we're with you on day one to make sure that we are isolating issues and being able to share that data and insights across the board, because it could be helping another city. It could be helping another utility. It could be helping another school district figure out how to get ahead of issues. So very important for us to invest in people, invest in technology, collaborate early, yeah.
Jamie, you bring up so many good points there, and I think workforce development, from SAE's perspective, we train 10,000 engineers a year. We take a lot of pride in that. When you think about all of the skills that are going to be required, and you think about the just incredible amount of new workers that are going to have to be into this field, would you tell us just a little bit more about what ChargerHelp's model looks like, and what you're doing to prepare the next generation of workers and some of these folks that would be otherwise not have access to clean tech jobs? You have a fantastic model, and certainly we'd love to hear a little bit more about it. And then please, any other panelists, just weigh in as you see fit.
Yeah, I mean, workforce development is one thing. Enablement and resulting in real jobs is another. And so ChargerHelp, being a private company that maintains charging stations, we not only go out and train folks, but in most cases when we secure contracts, we're able to hire those folks as W-2 employees and have them work on our teams to go and do the work that we do. But in addition to hiring folks to participate in this space, we also do community-based training, which is really providing foundational information and skills that get folks excited and informed about what potential jobs there are out there. And yes, our focus is on EVSE technicians, but there's also additional pathways resulting in like project management, reliability management, network operations, technical support, right? All these things that we need to rely on for this whole thing to go around. So we do offer foundational training. We offer reskilling training, which includes true walkaway certifications with NFPA and OSHA and lockout tagout. And then of course we offer a nice package training that is multifaceted, and the software, hardware, landscape, and of course all of those safety certifications needed to be an in-field technician. So very, very proud of the work we're doing, yeah.
I'd like to offer a case in point with the City of LA's workforce. So we have, like I mentioned earlier, 20,000 vehicles across 6 different fleets, and generally an aging workforce, which I think is the same across many fields, certainly in the government. We talk about the silver tsunami and 50% of our workforce being eligible to retire if they haven't already retired. And we have a lot of mechanics. We have a lot of other fueling infrastructure that has been the paradigm, obviously, for the last 100 years. And this issue of not having staff trained on this equipment is very, very real. It is something we deal with every day. We get, oh, I had a breaker flip, and well, the guy who is the fuel pump guy is not allowed to go to the electrical room and deal with that, or I don't have the right staff who's able to go and manage the resetting of the piece of equipment for X, Y, or Z purpose. And then of course we don't have the people trained on the batteries and trained on the vehicles themselves and all this kind of stuff, which it's one thing when we're talking about sedans, but as we get into what is the bread and butter of the city's fleet, medium and heavy duty equipment, profilers, pavers, trucks, utility vans, etc., we are going to need sort of specialized but sort of broad at the same time within the context of electrification, skilled workers. And we cannot get them right now. We can't get enough of them right now. We need all the ChargerHelps of the world. We need the LA Trade Techs. We need the other vocational schools all doing this stuff. It is a massive, it's not a blind spot. We know that this is an issue, but it's a massive need. that is only going to sort of get more and more bottlenecked over the next few years if it's not addressed.
The good news, though, is that, as you all know, Governor Newsom has been a tremendous champion for vehicle electrification with this $10 billion budget over 6 years to electrify not just fleets, but all vehicle types. And as part of that investment here in California, it includes funding for workforce development. So the CEC has included that in their Clean Transportation Plan, which we support as well. So there is a solution to all of this. And our community colleges here in California have also rolled out several programs, and they're partnering with OEMs like Proterra and others on that workforce training.
One final note is, for us and in our experience over the last 2+ years, it is not challenging for us to find folks who are very motivated to enter this space and to help tackle this problem. It is that we're a business, and in order for our business to thrive, it comes down to contracts, right? And subscription services that allow us to do our best work. And so very boldly, you can easily subscribe and invest in the work that we're doing by partnering with us to be an O&M provider with our reliability as a service product so that we can continue to do the work that we do. And just to kind of add even numbers to it, because I'm sure you're all numbers people in some capacity, but when we first launched in the market, we opened up applications for EVSE technicians, and we received over 1,600. We have also actually performed, foundational community training for over 500 people across the country, and which includes the first ever all-women EVSE technician cohort, which happened at Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. So we are happy to bring in the folks, and we just need to be in the position to be successful. So think about, who you're partnering with and why.
I just want to build off something that, Michael, you mentioned, and it's when you mentioned batteries being another critical part of this whole electrification equation. SAE International is participating to some degree in the LiBridge program, which is a program in the federal government where they've assembled experts from industry, from academia, from the public sector to prepare a report effectively on lithium-ion battery, critical minerals, battery manufacturing in the U.S. To ultimately develop future policy. And in some of that research, they point out that when you look at the number of electrochemists, for example, that have PhDs in electrochemistry in the United States today, that number is not as high as you would think. And so when you think about the people that are going to be critical to understanding and what mining critical minerals and bolstering battery manufacturing in the United States is going to require, it really gets back to this question of workforce development. So they project that the number of people in the kind of the battery ecosystem is going to have to 10x over the next couple decades. So it's an enormous problem, and I think that it's really good that as we think about what needs to happen to get fleets ready for electrification, it's certainly a core component. So if we can transition a little bit, Heidi, I'd like to ask you a couple questions. So from BP Pulse's perspective, as one of the nation's leading transportation fuel suppliers and retailers, there are vehicles and there are companies every day that rely on getting fuel, whether it's currently gasoline or electrification, that are transporting critical products that are delivering people to hospitals. When you think about a couple of these core things like reliability and design, and then deployment, and have any questions, and please just, yes, sir.
You touched on a lot of the interesting aspects, challenges to building out a charging network. The one that you haven't talked about is who's going to be carrying the inventories, the spares, the parts that are needed for maintenance. There's been a lot of debate whether you need third parties to step in, whether it's going to be private companies, charging companies have to develop their own system. Can you just sort of talk how you envision that playing out?
Jaime. do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think it is a multi-layered approach. For instance, ChargerHelp playing a role in locally storing and managing parts on behalf of manufacturers, since we're certified across dozens of manufacturers in the industry, is certainly one strategy, and one that we'll be leveraging heavier in 2023 as supply chain kind of recovers. There's also a great need for just more, national part storage across the country, which I do believe utilities or cities or, the types of like distributors, style can play a part in. You're spot on. Like there's a very siloed way in which parts are delivered into the ecosystem, and it's not scalable, and it's not efficient, and it frankly drives a lot of costs up. And and being in the green space, there's nothing that sends a chill up my spine more than like a SIM card going in a box across the United States on a plane. So yeah, I think there's a multi-layered approach to be taken there, and I think it's important that we focus on it and get ahead of the parts needed to support stations over time.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
So for Michael, I'm curious with the LA fleet, how you're prioritizing electrification and planning for it. Obviously, there's shortages and difficulty in getting certain technology and on the infrastructure side as well, but with such a diversity of vehicles, are you trying to figure out certain needs, or do you have certain directives of like port operations or bus fleets? I'm just curious how you thought about that.
So in our Green New Deal that was released in 2019, we specified that we have a zero emission first procurement guideline. So if there is an operationally fit piece of equipment that is zero emission, one of our 6 fleets, that's what they need to use. So that's the baseline, right? So obviously once you go beyond that procurement guideline, you get into the realities of what technology does and doesn't exist. So from that vantage point, so there's the vehicle side and the charger side, and these are moving in parallel paths. With the vehicles, we're obviously starting with sedans. That's by far and away what we have the most of at the moment in terms of electric, and slowly have been testing other things. We do have a significant electric bus fleet. I think over 35 at the moment in our DOT dash fleet, and then 40 or so in the LA Metro fleet, with hundreds more on the way for both of those agencies. So that's sort of, I'm going to put those over here because bus electrification is sort of one thing, but with the rest of the city fleet, we're starting to get these F-150 Lightnings. We just put in an order for the EV Silverados. We sort of know in these early years what is coming. Everything else we're seeing with the market is sort of coming in onesies and twosies for us right now. So we're testing out step-in vans for DWP, or for example, our library system, which has a mobile library. So we'll be testing those, and of course we've been testing electric trash trucks. And once we find equipment that sort of works and demonstrates that it's past Gen 1, then we can start planning sort of, okay, now we move from the order of 1 or 2 to an order of 50 or 100 or something like that. And those orders will be coming in the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years for a lot of that equipment. I'm not so bullish on certain pieces of very, very specialized equipment like street paving equipment, which is just so, they last for 20 years and they're very, very specialized. But for most of the other stuff, I think we'll start seeing commercially reliable equipment soon, which, honestly for me puts the most fear on the infrastructure piece of it, which is really the harder part at this point. So we have identified all of our facilities that are going to sort of need immediate electrification in the near term for work trucks and stuff like that. We're beginning to get, we're talking with DWP, of course, and getting information on what's going on there power-wise. Are we going to need a major line upgrade and things like that? And then it's budgeting. So now we're trying to put money into the budget every year to do some of that major infrastructure work, and hoping that we're going to be able to get some, discretionary NEVI funds and other federal dollars and state dollars, because honestly, as much as our city council and the mayor will want to put money in for this, even the amazing 7 and 8 figure amounts that they might be willing to put is not enough. You know, we need tens and hundreds of millions of dollars just to electrify our facilities, probably. So thinking about it and figuring out how we can, you know, sort of hit the low-hanging fruit first, basically.
Sorry, before we continue, can you please repeat your question for the recording? Just summarize it real quick.
So I had asked how the LA fleet is being prioritized for electrification, and if it is based on specific uses or what's available first with vehicles and infrastructure combined.
Excellent, thank you. And I think, we have a couple questions. We have a few more minutes. Ma'am, down here, please.
Hi, Xantha Brusso. I'm with Cadmus. We're a consulting firm, and we're the third-party evaluators for the California Utilities Transportation Electrification Programs. And one of the things that we noted in doing the evaluation is that a lot of fleets weren't employing load management. And I know, Heidi, you mentioned load management as part of BP Pulse's feature, but I was wondering, in terms of the other panelists, how you've been supporting fleets and customers engaging in load management to really manage that impact on the grid.
Maybe define load management first. Low adaptive or automatic load management is just a way to manage the charge and the rate at which a charger is electrified, and also to control the energy source. You can basically throttle back on the power and spread it out over time when there's an abundance of energy so that you're not overloading the circuit at any one time. So it's a way to also cut back on distribution system upgrades. Just wanted to define those terms for the audience.
Well, I guess I'll chime in. So, you know, I think when you think about the grid as a whole, it's obviously far more than just EV chargers and everything else. But if you can get enough saturation, and this is the hard part, right? How do you get to that level of saturation where you have enough aggregation to be able to then manipulate outcomes on the grid based on that kind of demand management and everything else? We're seeing, I think, public utilities commissions largely, and then to a certain extent, some broader policies at the state and frankly even federal level that are kind of starting to move along that really try to prioritize some of these things, because now you're shifting the ability to move financing around and fund different pieces of the grid. And you're now commingling both grid costs and transportation costs in ways that never were before. So as users, you now have opportunities to really take advantage of that and save kind of on both ends and fund a lot of projects in the interim where you have a lot of these third parties coming in that are filling these spaces and offering new products. I think for the first time, actually just a couple days ago, Hawaii's PUC, I think, did the first statewide time of use rates as it applies to these sorts of things. I know there's like dozens of other cities that have already taken this step, but I think on the whole, once you start to crack that nut, I know it's something California's been in deep discussion with for, I don't know, a long time now, that's really going to start to open up a lot of that new capacity, especially when you have vehicle to grid, right? Then you have like this two-way flow of opportunity. And so now as utilities, you're really like excited about what that could mean, because it means you might not have to build another power plant. And I think challenging regulators to open up that opportunity is going to be key. You really can't plan unless you know exactly what it is you want to do. And those dockets, I think, are enormously complex. And sometimes, I know on our part, as policymakers, we've been asked to sort of kick the PUCs into action on some of that, because if not, you can go around in circles back and forth between utilities and other stakeholders for eons.
Heidi, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think I really just want to thank Senator Lee for his comments and also for highlighting the time varying rate, which Hawaii is taking the lead on again on green policy. Just wanted to, for Cadmus, you may already know this, but PUC currently requires utilities to educate customers about adaptive load management, but doesn't actually require them to provide it. And so that's where we are currently in California, but as part of the CPUC's most recent transportation electrification decision, they're now asking utilities to further define how they will conduct that outreach and how they will educate customers about it to help alleviate some of the stress on the grid, and then further reduce the likelihood of needing to upgrade the distribution system. So there is some progress, but thanks.
Can I add just one other point from a local fleet perspective? It will not be possible to hit like if we build for a coincidental load with everything being plugged in at the same time and all needing electricity, we will never build out. So the load management, whether it's adaptive or automated or whatever variety it happens to be, is needed in the near term and long term. It's just smart. That's like smart grid. We're going to need that technology, and that's why we're going to see companies like BP Pulse Fleet and others who are using it bring better and better solutions, and the workforce working in this will get more and more experienced with it and understand what it is. Right now, we're still in a nascent period where, like, if I talk to one of my fleet directors, they don't know what this means. They, say, they need to get educated on it.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And I know that we're running short on time, which is a shame because I feel like we could keep going as a group. I hope it was insightful for the audience. And just like to ask everybody to give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you, everybody.